Hello, Michael. Uh, for our viewers, this is Pamela Boll. I'm the director and producer of To Which We Belong, which is a film about how we can uh, mitigate climate change to a large degree by changing the way that we farm and ranch and use our lands, our working lands. So Michael Doane is my other person here, and he was in our film back in 2021.
Yeah.
And we're here to follow up. He's from the Nature Conservancy. Michael will tell us his exact title, which I'm probably wrong,
Yeah.
but it's about agriculture around the world. He's an amazing he's an amazing person to be doing this work, and his background is also interesting. We probably won't get into that too much, but he's a former farmer, let's put it that way.
Uh-huh.
But what we're really going to be talking about is what Michael's been doing with TNC since we last caught up with him, frankly, in the film, which was back, and we interviewed in Michael Doane in 2019.
Oh,
The
wow.
the film itself played at COP26, which was 2 years ago in Scotland, and I hope that it had some impact on what's happening in COP, that some of the impact that the film had led us to the COP28, just a tiny bit at least. So Michael, please tell us, your role at TNC, the title, and let's talk about the wins for you all.
Yeah. Well, Pam, thank you so much for having me come visit with you again. I really enjoyed the film. I think it was a remarkable step for us in this journey. And I'm so excited now to talk to you again and tell you about what's going on. So, as you mentioned, I do work for the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is an environmental organization. We work in 80 countries around the world. Our mission is to conserve the land and water upon which all life depends. And so you can imagine then that steps us right into this discussion about regenerative agriculture and what can it contribute in terms of solutions on the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, on the need to produce more food for a growing planet. And, there's just so much here that is very much in our mission, and I think is really becoming central to the way people are thinking about these solutions moving forward. So my role, you asked me to say just a little bit about my role. So I do lead our work on agriculture, but I also lead our work on fisheries and freshwater management. So it's really around food and water, which, I love that title, food and water. It just feels like a good place to be working, a lot of purpose. And I love food and water. I love to eat. I love to fish. I love to just experience the whole thing. So yeah, there's a lot going on. And when you were saying that we filmed in 2019, I couldn't, believe that. It's just time goes by so quickly. I'll just give you a few, if it's okay, a few things that I think are really exciting about what's happening now a few years later in this movement. So we just came out of the big annual climate summit. It's called COP28, which stands for Conference of the Parties. It's held annually, and all nations gather together and meet out our climate policies. And this is really remarkable when you think about it, because this is a shared problem, and yet there's no real mechanism to sort out whose problem is it and who's going to provide the solutions and how do we pay for it. So that's really what gets discussed at these meetings. Traditionally, agriculture has not been central to the discussion. Number one, it's been a very sensitive sector. Food in general is politically sensitive. Sovereign governments don't like to bring up, food security issues. But what's occurred to many leaders over time is just how important this issue is if we're serious about mitigation, if we're serious about adaptation. You can't ignore agriculture and food systems. It is, we think, about 1/3 of the emissions, the excess emissions today. And so if we don't take aggressive action to seek mitigation, to seek reductions in the ag sector, and it just goes along business as usual, we could have remarkable success decarbonizing many other parts of the economy, mainly energy sector parts of the economy, and we'd still have growing emissions. That's how big agriculture is. So we need to have it on the agenda. And this COP that just concluded was the most significant meeting ever in the discussions on agriculture. Over 150 countries committed at this meeting to go back to their nationally determined commitments. That's their plan to mitigate emissions and to report that transparently back annually to the Conservancy of the parties on the stock take. Over 150 countries this year signed a declaration saying they were going to go back and center agriculture and food systems in their nationally determined commitments. And they're going to report out on that in COP30. So that'd be in two more years, which we think that COP is potentially going to be in Brazil. And so there's 5 high ambition countries that are going to set the pace on some of this, and Brazil is one of those countries. And additionally, there was a group that the Nature Conservancy was part of private sector companies and NGOs and other actors who said, we're aligned with this, and we're committing projects that total about 160 million hectares in size of regenerative landscapes that will be living laboratories where we can do this work with you. And so it is by far easily the biggest moment for agriculture and climate negotiations. And I remember that your film was 2 years ago, and I remember how much energy and momentum was created at that moment. And I have to think that these things are not unrelated. So thank you for raising the profile and raising the attention on these issues. I have more to tell you, but I'll stop there.
Let me ask you, I know you have so much more, but let me tell you something. I had right before coming here, was Christmas shopping with my son, and he's a grown-up, but and I said, let me talk to you a little bit about COP28 because I'm having this interview and I want to make sure I get all the terms wrong. And also I have to write up something for our social media later. Long story short, he was so skeptical. And one of the questions that I think I'd like to ask you, because he asked me and I didn't really have the answer, what is going to hold these countries and these non-states, but the folks who have committed to 160 million hectares to be done regeneratively, what is going to hold them to their promises? Because we saw with the Paris Agreement, great, we all agreed. What happened? Not a whole lot of action, at least from the general perspective in the world. So what's going to hold these folks to their promises?
Sure. Well, this is a voluntary, non-binding conference of the parties. There is no mechanism, if you will, to call balls and strikes, if you will, on this at some later date. Countries, though, do come to these meetings with their head of state. They come to these meetings with the backing of their governments. They come to these meetings with CEOs of companies. So there is a level of decision making where we know that we're setting this agenda at the right level. We're basically setting out mechanisms such as the new loss and damage fund, first ever created, where we can start to think about how do we combine resources to invest in adaptation from countries that have been disproportionately creating emissions with countries that are disproportionately suffering from some of the consequences. So
pause there for a minute. The adaptation thing is, explain that. I know what you're talking about, but just what we're basically talking, if I can say in my own words, is that for years we've had a call out for the first world, if you will, or the more technologically oriented countries to help the countries that are experiencing the fallout from climate change. And this is the first time we have money on the table, correct?
That's right. First time ever. And it was really not anticipated in this negotiation. And so it does give rise to real mechanisms that then investors and governments and companies can use to guide investment. And ultimately, I would say that needs to be how we mark progress. Are we mobilizing policy in the countries that reflect what they've committed to in the meetings? So the important thing now to watch is how do these 150 or so countries that committed to centering agriculture and food systems in their nationally determined commitment, how does that manifest itself in their domestic policy agenda? We do have means to track accountability on that. How does finance mobilize? How does investment flows mobilize against what is needed to attend to these commitments of working in these regenerative landscapes? So there's ways that we can track that. And I think that's part of the role of civil society. Honestly, it's part of the role of NGOs like the Nature Conservancy to share our perspective very independently about how we're doing against those commitments. But ultimately, I think this level of diplomacy is needed to set the agenda and to prioritize things. But ultimately, it will take innovation and investment and the decisions of private individuals who see that and are inspired to invest in their own way in solutions that nobody's telling them to do. But they see the opportunity, they see the need, and they become inspired to do more to create solutions. And that's what I'm honestly resting my hope on.
Let's talk more about that with the group, the 20, is it 20 businesses who have committed between 10 and 30 billion, I think it was, for regenerative food systems, or you can say that better than me.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact numbers, to be real
Oh,
honest.
well, see, I'm not the only one, huh?
After a while, these numbers are so big, they're hard to relate to.
They're
But what I can
big,
say,
but let's make it simple as we can, because
yeah,
they're big, it's complicated, and let's just get to the heart of that matter. In my opinion, we've got about 20 of the largest agricultural producers, conglomerates in the world who've said, we're going to invest money in a new way of farming and producing food. And that new way might be called regenerative, it might be called more sustainable, it might be called a lot of things. But from what I see, that's a big deal.
yeah, it's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
You know, we're not having a debate about if we should do this. We're really now talking about how to do it, and in the private sector and in government at the highest levels. And so you've got the who's who of the largest countries, the largest companies, the largest environmental NGOs, all aligned that this needs to be front and center for us moving forward. And so, you know, that's very encouraging. They're still meeting out standards on how to measure results and things like that. Those standards are complicated, and it's important that we get those right. But you know, there's not really a debate right now about if we need to move toward this form of regenerative agriculture. That word is now becoming mainstreamed in the vernacular. It's becoming part of the way people think about this. That it's not enough to talk about sustainability. We actually need a food system that starts to restore and regenerate nature, and that should be our aim. Anything less is not going to do what we need to over the next generation. I think the most important thing right now is time. You know, we have solutions. You can go out to farms and find farms that are doing a wonderful job with this, but it's still too small in terms of its adoption right now. It's too limited, and there's still some knowledge gaps as you apply this in different contexts and things like that. So the question is, will we get there fast enough? I don't really doubt that we'll eventually have very widespread adoption of regenerative agriculture. The question in my mind is, do we see that happen fast enough relative to what we're seeing about the climate and biodiversity crisis?
Mhm. So just for our people who may not have seen the film yet, I want to give a couple of examples of regenerative agriculture and agree with me or not, okay? What we might want to do is, instead of doing tilling and what we might call industrialized agriculture, which has got a bad connotation, I don't even like that term, But when we till the soil to plant, we're releasing carbon. And also the carbon, when it's released from the soil, creates some of the global issues that we're having. When we do regenerative agriculture, we're not tilling, but we're also adding more plants, more diverse plants to that land. We don't leave the land uncovered.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to sort of say those two things. And what that allows is more carbon to be drawn down from the atmosphere where it doesn't do us much good and into the soil where it actually creates more water holding capacity of the soil. And those carbon sugars also are feeding the microbial or the biology of the soil, which is what makes the soil more fertile. Plants grown, the crops grown this way are not as apt to become eaten up by pests, correct? They're healthier. The plants are healthier, okay, because you've got more variety of microbes in the soil. I just wanted to give a sort of broad view of what some of these regenerative practices could be. And that's what our film is about also. So, okay, we're running out of time. What's the solution for that?
Well, as the Nature Conservancy, I would say first we want to really understand what producers need to make this transition. At the end of the day, I think farmers many times feel maligned as these discussions take place. They often feel like society is against them, that they've done something wrong. And actually, what we're saying is, no, this is your moment to shine. We want to elevate your role in what is some of the most important work in the world, which is to safeguard these natural resources, to create these climate solutions, and to do it while feeding us all well. And so, really elevating their role and centering on what producers need to make this transition. Number two, we want to mobilize a lot more resources into this space. As I mentioned before, the ag and food sector accounts for about 1/3 of the excess climate emissions. And yet, what we're finding is it's only getting about 4 to 5% of the climate finance investment, whether it's innovation investment or commercial investment or policy. And that's because we have raised a lot of attention, rightly so, on the energy transition. And so there's been a huge influx of new investment capital to support that, renewables and all that. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic.
Capture,
What's that?
technical carbon capture.
Sure.
Yeah.
But at this point, we need to shift. We need to mobilize more resources to unlock regenerative agriculture. And then the third thing that we really focus on is most of this will take policy. Policy at the national government level that prioritizes how countries want to start to dedicate public funding to support this. And that's everything from nutritional standards to support for farmers and how that's shared, risk sharing mechanisms, and things that support a lot of the value that's created that's in the public good. It may not be directly in the farmer's interest, but it may be for the good of society, such as clean water or reduced emissions. And that's a public policy investment. And so mainstreaming through public policy is the third thing. So that's our plan right now, Pam, and we're doing that work in many different ways all around the world. I think the thing that makes our contribution unique right now is we're doing this globally. We've got some of our best teams in China doing some of this work. China is the largest food producer in the world. They're also the largest importer of food from around the world. And so the way that China goes on this is huge. It's going to really make a difference on the scale of this movement around the world. Africa. So we're doing a lot of work in East Africa. And Africa is going to go through the biggest demographic transition of any place in the world over the next 30 years. And it's pretty scary, what can happen there. So the way that agriculture goes, and if we can see this regenerative agriculture take hold there and maybe step over some of the mistakes that we've made in Western economies, it would be huge for the continent. We would have the potential to really safeguard some tremendous natural resources there. And then the final place would be in Latin America and Brazil, where we've got huge rates of deforestation still happening today. And now we're starting to see that this regenerative agriculture is going to be key to getting more productivity off the land that's already been opened up so we can safeguard land from being cleared, safeguard some of the most important biodiverse forests in the world from being cleared for agriculture. So to me, that's the key right now is we've got to be on our front foot, activating on those three issues globally and really working for scale.
Mhm. That's really a beautiful summary of the things that you're doing. There was something I was reading in the COP28 summation, and it was about oh gosh, I don't remember the name. I think we've already talked about it. The various agricultural companies who have agreed to these.
Yeah.
Again, I want to press this because it's interesting to me, and I think it's something that a lot of people have a lot of skepticism about the UN, even the climate talks. To me, it's the most exciting thing in the world, but people want to know how, if a company says, well, we're going to source our soybeans or our wheat or corn regeneratively, what's happening to make that who's checking that out?
Yeah. Well, it's not going to happen at the climate meeting. That's where people are meeting to
For the
discuss
policy.
where
Yeah.
do we need to go and how do we get there. But then it comes back to working at individual companies and working with individual governments and getting into the details of how their commitments can be manifested in their context. And that's where we do a lot of our work, working quietly behind the scenes with companies, with governments in a fairly technical way, to think about the difficult decisions that lie in front of us on how we can operationalize some of this. And we are willing to work with almost anybody that we feel is committed to the right outcome.
Mhm.
And so, there's other NGOs doing that work too. But I think that is the role of civil society. It's the role of technical experts in universities, is to come alongside these companies and governments that have a big task. It's not easy, but that's where the action is right now. And I think there's good reason for people to be skeptical if they just read the headlines coming out of Dubai that it's going to change.
Mhm.
But where I sit, I am now seeing how our technical experts are working with those same companies and governments behind the scenes to implement
Got
some
it.
of this. And so I know it's happening.
That's very exciting. And I knew that, but I wanted to hear it from you so that other people can understand that the UN is one body and it's very, very important. But then there's all these people who are already working with companies to reduce emissions and change the way we do agriculture. Can I ask you something that is confusing to me? Agriculture is quote unquote makes up 30% of our emissions overall. But then we also hear another 30% number that we can sequester 30% through using nature-based solutions.
Yeah.
Now, if we were able to actually implement regenerative practices on working lands, by that I mean farms and ranches, and stop the emissions of 30%, would we then add another 30% when we're talking about sequestering or you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah. So the math is big and it's confusing. Okay. So let me, in a very
Clarify.
try to clarify the roadmap to
Mhm.
seeing the food system become a net zero part of the climate solution by mid-century. And so there's been science done on this that's really outstanding,
Mhm.
and it reflects the work that we're doing. So I'm just going to walk you through four things that are the most time-sensitive things that need to start to happen now. One is halting deforestation. If we can arrest deforestation, we stop about half of the emissions that are coming from agriculture right there.
Wow.
Number two is not every value chain is as intensive on its emissions. So getting to low emission beef, dairy, rice, and nutrient management, those are the four value chains that matter the most in terms of just not inventing new stuff, but just migrating to the frontier where some producers are already at. If we can do that soon, that matters a lot.
Mhm.
Third is realizing half of the technical potential for soil carbon sequestration on pastures and cropland. So we don't have to get it all. If
Mhm.
we just get half of that technical potential, that's the third most important thing. And then finally, is beginning to reduce food loss and waste. About a third of what we produce is wasted. So if
Mhm.
we can start to reduce that, shrink that, even a small way, that has more contribution than a lot of things people think about, like shifting diets
Mhm.
or going completely away from large scale agriculture. It turns out those are not the solutions that matter. It's these four things that are time sensitive, but if we can get on that track, and time matters the most, there's a pathway to get to zero on food systems, which is a really big deal, and I think should give people a lot of hope.
Yeah, well, I do too. And you're right. We have this idea that we all have to stop eating beef or we have to go plant-based but again, uh, what are I wouldn't have a clue personally how to reduce waste. Would you
Yeah,
at
I do.
TNC?
Yeah, I do. I think there's little things each of us can do in our daily life to action this issue. And that's what I love about this work on food systems is everybody can play a role. Okay. Yes, the farmer has a big role in this. They matter the most. That's why we're elevating them.
Yeah.
But we matter too. What we eat matters, but also how efficient we are in taking what we buy and consume. Okay, that's in our control.
Mhm.
And there's been great documentaries about this, wonderful books written about it, stuff like that. We put a keyhole garden in our family's home this last year, and it has a little compost bin, so we can take our excess food, put it in, and compost it, and grow our table garden right there. And so that's a wonderful way that we don't send food waste to landfill. So not sending food waste to landfill is a big part of reducing methane.
Mhm.
So there's lots of things that we can do, Pam, that can just be little things to us, but if we all start to do them, it just becomes part of the ethic of we're all in this together.
I love the compost idea. I compost. I never throw anything out. And, I don't even do anything. I just take my bin from the kitchen and throw it in there and turn it a little bit, oftentimes with a gloved hand because I can't find anything else. And you know what? It's pretty big. It's about the bin that I have. It's not the best one I've ever had, but it's about 6 feet by 6 feet square. Unfortunately, it's not open on the front, which is better because then you can dig the stuff out. But the point is, I throw stuff in there, weekly.
Mhm.
And I have the blackest, richest soil
Mhm.
in there. And I'm not doing anything except throwing it in there. And maybe as I always turn it, I put newspapers in too. That creates a little bit better mix, you
Yeah.
know. So it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
For a non-gardener, I think it's really easy, you
Right.
know.
I don't have a tremendous green thumb myself, but I'm inspired by this. And I've loved to talk to our kids about it and just talk about, hey, this is a small part of how we can be part of the solution.
Yeah.
And I think people do need those handles to grab and say, yeah, this feels big. This feels challenging. It feels scary,
Yeah.
but I'm doing something about it right here, right now. And I think we all need to have that opportunity to take action directly and then in supporting efforts that we really want to get behind.
Mhm. And the other thing that's interesting is if we can get agriculture right, if you will, if we can get it, you already mentioned this, I'm going to repeat it. The more we feed the soil so that they're more fertile and can grow more food, the less we need to cut down that forest,
Right.
the less we need to, and the less we pollute the waters,
Yeah.
the waterways. Because if we have to put a lot of fertilizers and maybe even pesticides and insecticides on, guess
Yeah.
what? You're going to have a problem downstream,
Yeah.
right? We're going to
Yeah.
have the dead zones. So it's a holistic solution
Yeah.
to a lot of different problems.
Yeah.
And again, because I've got my son's questions in my mind here, you and I've talked a long time about these things, and we know that it works. People get on board eventually with a good idea. But where is the financial incentive for these companies who are doing who are promising to source 50% or 60% or 20% of their ag commodities regeneratively? What's the financial incentive?
Yeah. Well, it's
Or the incentive, maybe it's not financial.
yeah. I think we're going to need to continue to see more policy-led investments where we have governments that are saying this is an efficient way for us to invest in climate solutions, and it can come through agriculture, it can kind of come through the food system, and then food system actors are looking at the same opportunity and saying we'll co-invest in that.
Mhm.
And the US government just kicked off a program like that just recently in the Climate Smart Commodities program. So they put out $3 billion of new incentives to start climate smart agriculture and really regenerative agriculture in the US. That's going to be followed up by another $20 billion here over the next few years. So that's like real funding that's going in. And so now we have many, many actors across the spectrum beginning to align that to the way that they're doing business and invest those dollars that are public dollars, but also bring private capital to that and match that in a way that's pretty stimulating. And here's the good news, Pam. I do believe over the long run, this is a better way to farm. It actually becomes more profitable for the farmer. So we don't have to think about this as a forever increase on food prices or public subsidies to agriculture. I think this is about sparking the innovation, sparking the adoption trends. And over time, farmers discover that they can actually be more profitable farming this way. If we didn't believe that, I'd have a hard time believing this can scale up. But that is my
I
belief.
agree. I absolutely agree. And that's because the input prices are creeping up. And by inputs, we mean fertilizer and even some pesticides or insecticides, which, gosh, I hope that when people are listening to this, they understand that when we have uh, the biology of the soil in better shape by drawing down more carbon through cover crops, no-till, and other practices, that the soil, the plants are healthier. They don't need as maybe they need some insect, I don't know. They need much fewer inputs. Is that a good statement?
Uh, Look, there's a lot of evidence where farmers have been able to make that transition. And I think it starts by getting really super healthy soil
Yeah.
that's very high functioning, that starts to function in ways that farmers today haven't seen in their lifetimes. They often have not grown up farming in ways where they're used to seeing soils that produce plants that have just higher levels of plant health and stuff like that. There's still a lot of challenges with pests. I don't want to kind of gloss that over and
I'm not
suggest that
saying
as
to.
soon
Yeah.
as you move that direction, then it's a utopia and you have no problems. No, there's going to be ongoing challenges to manage pest pressure when you're producing anything. But it gives you a different set of tools, and a lot of those tools are nature-based solutions to begin to manage that. And so to me, it's just got huge, huge benefits for society in so many different profound ways. And that's why at the Nature Conservancy, we're committed to seeing this mainstream just as soon as we can.
No, love it. Do you have any questions?
For you, well, yes. I mean, what are you doing next? What are you doing now? Are you getting ready to make another film, or what's your ambition
Oh,
here?
gosh, another film. No. Um,
Okay.
I am not, but I find myself in this place every time I make a film. It takes at least 2 years after the film has been out for me to begin to think, huh, let's do this. So that's a
Mhm.
normal thing
Yeah,
for me.
yeah,
I am seriously committed to getting the word out about regenerating our planet, and that it's not pie in the sky. It's not utopia, as you said. It's a actual there's an actual way to do this. And not only will we grow healthier food and restore our waterways, perhaps by not having as much fertilizer run off, okay, because you're not putting as much on. That's the goal, at least.
mhm,
What we've seen in our film, and also what I've seen in all the readings I've done and all the talking to you, is that when you farm or ranch in these more regenerative ways, the biodiversity increases in the land. Not
yeah,
only the microbial biodiversity, but the birds, the bees, all the things that make our life here possible.
yeah,
So biodiversity is another huge win with the climate. On the COP 28, there was like an agreement about climate and biodiversity, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, it's just it's a pathway to many solutions that we need, and there's growing consensus on that. And to me, it just kind of comes down to this fundamental question: how quickly can we make it happen? And what are the constraints to making that happen? And what we've done is to not try to answer that just in a very kind of global meta analysis way, but look landscape by landscape and understand, how did the food system become what it is in this landscape? What were the factors over time that led it to become the way it is? And there's biophysical issues, there's cultural issues, there's political, economic, market-led issues. And that's what we call our foodscapes analysis. And it's, to us, the way in to think about solutions and coming up with rather bespoke and customized solutions and pathways that people can buy into in their own context, and hopefully kind of get behind and support as part of this transition, because it won't look the same around the world. Regenerative agriculture will take on many different forms based on where we are in the world and what our constraints and opportunities are.
Yeah, that's an important point. For example, I was just reading this morning about agroforestry and how much it's made a difference in the Sahel.
Mm,
Uh, and that's a very dry area, nearly desertified. And this is bringing back the life of that desert.
yeah.
And it started by the folks who live there. So when we say regenerative, it can show up in different places in different ways. But essentially, the one thing it has in common, no matter where, is to focus on your soil health. Correct? We can say
That's
that.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's common in almost every definition, and I think it's a first principle, which is, start with the context of your farm or your ranch or your production environment, and then look at the soil,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it will guide you in terms of what needs to happen, and as that soil goes, then I think we have a good barometer for whether we're moving in a regenerative way across a wide range of indicators or not.
Yeah. Great. Well, listen, before we end, I just wanted you to tell us um, what can people do to support your work
Yeah.
at Nature Conservancy?
Well, many things. We are always open for engagement and communication. I would love for people on any of their social media channels to go to hashtag grow positive, hashtag grow positive. So whether it's, just pick your favorite social media channel, and there will be a stream of stories and examples and a lot of the things that we talked about there that are coming from the Nature Conservancy, where we're really lifting up and elevating the producer as part of the story. So please participate in that and help us amplify this work. Second, go to nature.org. We've got a wonderful website. If you go to provide food and water, that kind of leads you into the corridor of the activities I'm leading on regenerative agriculture, aquaculture, freshwater management, fisheries, these food and water-based solutions. And then, feel free to drop me an email, michael.doane@tnc.org, and I'd be happy to correspond. So thank you for this platform, Pam. It's wonderful to talk to you again.
Wonderful to talk to you too. Thank you, Michael.